Hi, are you taking the US Citizenship Test? This video is part 6 on what you need to understand about recent American history for the test. There are 8 videos in this series containing all the facts that you need to know to prepare for and pass the civics test first time. For the rest of the episodes in this series, take my complete course using the link in the description just below and find some other great resources to help you pass the test first time. Recent American history and other important historical information. The United States fought 5 wars in the 1900s. World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Persian Gulf War. World War I began in 1914. It was a long and bloody struggle. The United States entered the war in 1917 after the German submarines attacked British and US ships, and the Germans contacted Mexico about starting a war against the United States. The war ended in 1918 when the Allied powers, led by Britain, France, Italy and the United States, defeated the Central Powers, led by Germany, Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. The Treaty of Versailles officially ended the war in 1919. World War I was called the War to End All Wars. World War II began in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. France and Great Britain then declared war on Germany. Germany had alliances with Italy and Japan, and together they formed the Axis powers. The United States entered World War II in 1941 after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The United States joined France, Great Britain and the Soviet Union as the Allied powers and led the 1944 invasion of France, known as D-Day. The liberation of Europe from German power was completed by May 1945. World War II did not end until Japan surrendered in September 1945. The Korean War began in 1950 when the North Korean army moved across the 38th parallel into South Korea. The 38th parallel was a boundary established after World War II. This boundary separated the northern area of Korea, which was under communist influence, from the southern area of Korea, which was allied with the United States. At the time, the United States was providing support to establish a democratic South Korean government. The United States provided military support to stop the advance of the North Korean army. In the Korean conflict, democratic governments directly confronted communist governments. The fighting ended in 1953 with the establishment of the countries of North Korea and South Korea. From 1959 to 1975, United States Armed Forces and the South Vietnamese Army fought against the North Vietnamese in the Vietnam War. The United States supported the democratic government in the south of the country to help it resist pressure from the communist north. The war ended in 1975 with the fall of Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam. In 1976, Vietnam was under total communist control. Almost 60,000 American men and women in the military died or were missing as a result of the Vietnam War. On the 2nd of August 1990, the Persian Gulf War began when Iraq invaded Kuwait. This invasion put the Iraqi army closer to Saudi Arabia and its oil reserves, which supplied much of the world with oil. The United States and many other countries wanted to drive the Iraqi army out of Kuwait and prevent it from invading other nearby countries. In January 1991, the United States led an international coalition of forces authorized by the United Nations into battle against the Iraqi army. Within a month, the coalition had driven the Iraqis from Kuwait. The coalition declared a ceasefire on February the 28th, 1991. Woodrow Wilson was the 28th President of the United States. President Wilson served 2 terms from 1913 to 1921. During his first term, he was able to keep the United States out of World War I. By 1917, Wilson knew this was no longer possible, and he asked Congress to declare war on Germany. On January the 8th, 1918, he made a speech to Congress outlining 14 points that justified the war and called for a plan to maintain peace after the war. President Wilson said, "We entered this war because violations of rights had occurred which touched us to the quick and made the life of our own people impossible unless they were corrected and the world secure for all against their reoccurrence." The war ended that year, and Wilson travelled to Paris to work out the details of the surrender by Germany. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was President of the United States from 1933 until 1945. He was elected during the Great Depression, which was a period of economic crisis after the stock market crash of 1929. His program for handling the crisis was called the New Deal. It included programs to create jobs and provided benefits and financial security for workers across the country. Under his leadership, the Social Security Administration was established in 1935. Roosevelt led the nation into World War II after Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. He gave the country a sense of hope and strength during a time of great struggle. Roosevelt was elected to office 4 times. He died in 1945, early in his 4th term as president. His wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, was a human rights leader throughout her lifetime. The Japanese bombed US naval bases in a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, on December the 7th, 1941. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, as Commander-in-Chief of the military, obtained an official declaration of war from Congress. Japan's partners in the Axis, Italy and Germany, then declared war on the United States. The Allies fought against the German Nazis, the Italian fascists, and Japan's military empire. This was a truly world war, with battles fought in Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific Ocean. Before becoming the 34th President of the United States in 1953, Dwight D. Eisenhower served as a Major General in World War II. As Commander of US forces and Supreme Commander of the Allies in Europe, he led a successful D-Day invasion of Normandy, France, on June 6, 1944. In 1952, he retired from active service in the military. He was elected President of the United States later that year. As President, he established the Interstate Highway System, and in 1953, the Department of Health, Education and Welfare, now known as Health and Human Services, was created. He oversaw the end of the Korean War. Eisenhower left the White House in 1961 after serving 2 terms as president. The main concern of the United States during the Cold War was the spread of communism. The Soviet Union, that's the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR, was a powerful nation that operated under the principles of communism. The United States and its allies believed that a democratic government and a capitalist economy were the best ways to preserve individual rights and freedoms. The United States and its allies feared the expansion of communism to countries outside the Soviet Union. The Cold War began shortly after the end of World War II and lasted for more than 40 years. It ended with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the reunification of East and West Germany in 1990, and the breakup of the USSR in 1991. The modern civil rights movement in the United States began in 1954 when the Supreme Court ruled that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. The goal of the civil rights movement was to end racial discrimination against African Americans and to gain full and equal rights for Americans of all races. Using non-violent strategies such as bus boycotts, sit-ins, and marches, people came together to demand social change. As a result, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Civil Rights Act made segregation in public facilities and racial discrimination in employment and education illegal. The law protects African Americans, women, and others from discrimination. The Voting Rights Act banned literacy tests and other special requirements that had been used to stop African Americans from registering to vote. Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist minister and civil rights leader. He worked hard to make America a more fair, tolerant, and equal nation. He was the main leader of the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. Because of this movement, civil rights laws were passed to protect voting rights and end racial segregation. King believed in the ideals of the Declaration of Independence, that every citizen deserves America's promise of equality and justice. In 1963, King delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, which imagines an America in which people of all races exist together equally. He was only 35 years old when he received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 for his civil rights work. King was killed on April 4th, 1968. On September 11th, 2001, 4 aeroplanes flying out of US airports were taken over by terrorists from the Al-Qaeda network of Islamic extremists. 2 of the planes crashed into the World Trade Center's Twin Towers in New York City, destroying both buildings. 1 of the planes crashed into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. The 4th plane, originally aimed at Washington, D.C., crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. Almost 3,000 people died in these attacks, most of them civilians. It was the worst attack on American soil in the history of the nation. American Indians lived in North America for thousands of years before the European settlers arrived. There are more than 500 federally recognized tribes in the United States. Each tribe has its own social and political system. American Indian cultures are different from one tribe to another, with different languages, beliefs, stories, music, and foods. Earlier in their history, some tribes settled in villages and farmed the land for food. Other tribes moved frequently as they hunted or gathered food and resources. The federal government signed treaties with American Indian tribes to move the tribes to reservations. These reservations are recognized as domestic dependent nations. Let's now turn to the questions and answers that you need to learn for the recent American history and other important historical information part of the test. Name 1 war fought by the United States in the 1900s. The possible answers are World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War. Who was president during World War I? The answer is Woodrow Wilson. Who was president during the Great Depression and World War II? The answer is Franklin Roosevelt. Who did the United States fight in World War II? The answer is Japan, Germany, and Italy. During the Cold War, what was the main concern of the United States? The answer is communism. Before he was president, Eisenhower was a general. What war was he in? World War II. What movement tried to end racial discrimination? The answer is the Civil Rights Movement. What did Martin Luther King Jr. do? The answer is he fought for civil rights and he worked for equality of all Americans. What major event happened on September the 11th, 2001 in the United States? The answer is terrorists attacked the United States. Name 1 American Indian tribe in the United States. Potential answers include the Apache, the Iroquois, the Blackfeet, the Hopi, and the Inuit. Thanks for watching. For parts 7 and 8 in this series, please click on the link in the description below. This link takes you to my course with the complete episodes in this series and my full audiobook with everything you need to know to pass the US Civics Test first time. Just click on the link in the description below. Good luck in the test.